it's Christy. Welcome back to my channel and welcome to day 8 of my 2025 holiday card series. Today I'm going to be making a card using Lawn Fawn's Penguin Party, Snow Cool, Toboggan Together, Berry Happy Holidays, Cheesy Christmas, Really High Five, Winter Birds, Unicorn Picnic, and Simply Celebrate Hangouts. So the concept for this card is penguins at the disco. So I'm going to take that large balloon from Really High Five and I've stamped that upside down and I'm going to transform that into a disco ball. So I am doing the vertical lines first, just doing them in a little bit of a bow toward the center, and then I'm going to do the horizontal lines. And I did this in pencil first, and then I'm going to go over it with a Memento Tuxedo Black marker. I had a really hard time doing this on screen though, because I needed to turn the paper to be more comfortable to draw the lines properly. So it didn't turn out the best. Also, because my marker is really old, it was kind of dry and skipping, and so I had to go over the lines again. It just kind of turned out a mess. So I left the footage in the video to show you how I did it, but I redid it off screen, and that turned out a little bit better. I have also stamped out a second panel of background images that I'll be coloring off screen with the same colors that I'll use on the main part of the video. So I'm going to be coloring my penguins in some interesting colors, and that is because we are going to have this bright pink disco ball hanging overhead, and so that pink light would reflect on everything down below and kind of transform the colors beneath it. So rather than going with black or gray penguins, I'm actually going to do them in shades of blue and purple. So the first combo that I'm using is B60, B63, B66, and B69. I chose 2 of the penguins and started with the B69, laying in the shadows with that. Then I blended out with the B66. And for their little flipper that's on the far side of their body, I'm just going to use those 2 shades. For the rest of the body, I'm going to use all 3 of the darkest shades, and I'm going to save that B60 for the belly area. So once I have that all blended out, I'll come in with that B60, and I'm just going to flick in a little bit of color around the edges, and then leave the center part of the penguins white. I just want that blue to be a little bit of a definition there. And I'll grab my colorless blender and just soften the edges of that B60. The next 2 penguins I'm going to color in blue violets. I'm using BV11, BV13, and BV17. So I'm starting with the BV17 and laying in my shadows for them. For the one that is facing toward the left, which is going to be my girl penguin since she has her little eyelashes, I put my shadows on the right hand side of the body. That way I can keep the face nice and light. For the other penguin, he's facing completely forward, so I did my shadows pretty evenly on both the left and the right, with just a little extra highlight area on the left because I already know that he's going to go toward the right side of the card, so that disco ball would be flashing mostly on his left hand side. So I blended out with the BV13 and then used the BV11 for the highlight. And then for their whites, I'm going to use BV quadruple 0 and BV 00. And again, just laying in a little bit of that darker color and then softening it with the lighter shade, which is so light that I don't even need the colorless blender to soften that even further. Then I'm going to switch to some violets. I'm using V12, V15, and V17 for my last 2 penguins. So I've got this little guy, since he's facing toward the right, his shadows are going to fall on the left. And then the same with the last one, which is actually going to be my DJ. I'm going to use his earmuffs as headphones. For these two, I accidentally started first with the V15, so I had to go back in with the V17 and add my shadows in. Then I went back in with the V15 to just blend that out, and then I'll come in with the V12 for the highlight. I like to put that toward the top of the head near the face, also the top of the flipper, and sometimes alongside the belly, depending on how far they are turned toward the light. And then for their whites, I'm going to use V000 and V01. And again, that V000 is so light that I don't need the colorless blender. I can just leave that fading into the white cardstock. To that combo, I'm going to add the V04, and I will start to color in some of my accessories. I'm going to add a little bit of purple onto my fish in the bucket, which is going to be one of the snacks at this disco Christmas party. And I'm also going to add some of that to my snow cones, again, just some snacks. And I'm going to also color in that little bow. So I'm just adding in those kind of like pinkish purple shades because that will also help reflect the pink light from above. And then I'll also do the main part of the beanie on the one that is wearing the hat. Again, instead of going with black, I'm going to use some very desaturated blue violets. These are blue violets that have a lot of gray tone in them. I'm using BV20, BV23, BV25, and BV29. And I'm going to do a lot of the gear, like the headphones and the radio. So I'm starting with the BV29 for those, blending out with the BV25, and then I'm going to fill in with the BV23. And then for the bucket that is holding the fish, I'm going to start with the BV25 along the sides, blending toward the center so that it looks nice and round. I'll use the BV23 next, and then the BV20 for the highlight. I'm also going to use that BV20 on my fish to just add a little bit of a gray tone to them. I'll add a little bit of a gray tone to the paper cups of my snow cones and also to the white parts of the beanie hat. For their beaks and feet, I'm going to go with a bright orange. I'm using YR04, YR07, and YR09. And I'm just going to do them all quickly so that I don't have to switch back and forth between markers. So I'm doing all of the shadows with that YR09 on the lower part of the beak and on the base of the feet closest to the body. And then I'm blending out with the YR07, but making sure to leave room for that nice highlight because the YR04 is really what's going to bring it together and make it not look too bright. I don't want this to look like a neon cone, but I did want bright colors to reflect, again, the bright light that is going to be flashing overhead with that disco ball. So I'll just finish up that, and then I'm going to bring in a little bit of BG10 and BG11 for the left side of my snow cones. I'll also toss a little bit of that on my fish so that they look like they are kind of defrosting, like they're a little bit frozen. And then I'm going to start working on that disco ball. The shades that I'm using for that are RV00, RV02, RV04, RV06, and RV09. I'm only going to use up to 3 shades on any of those squares, but I wanted to have like a variety of tones as that disco ball is turning and those reflective squares, those mirrored squares are catching the light. They're going to be casting all that light around the room, but they're also not all going to be reflecting the same light because they're squares on a circle and they're also spinning. So I'm just kind of picking and choosing different ones. I'm doing mainly dark around the outside edges, but not just dark, and then having more of the light ones in the center. So I'm just kind of blending those with my shadows down at the bottom right corner, and then with the highlight toward the top left. But that just is because it feels a bit more natural to me being left-handed. So you could do it on either side. It really doesn't matter for the scene since it's going to be directly in the middle overhead. We just want to have the shadows on one side or the other and all matching so that it, looks like one whole unit. Then I'm going to bring in RV10 and RV11 to give my penguins some rosy cheeks. I'm using the RV11 first and just adding a little oval shape under the eye area. And then I'll blend around the outside edges of that with the RV10 to soften that into the white of the fur on their bellies. And then all that's left is to add a little bit of that pink reflection so that it really does look like that light is just cast all around the room. So I'm adding a little bit here and there with the RV10, anywhere that I think that something might be catching some of that light. I'm going to add a good amount of that pink into the radio because that is going to be directly underneath the disco ball. And then adding in a little bit of the RV11 as well, just to, intensify that reflectiveness. It looks weird right now as it's out of context, but once the scene comes together, I think it will make more sense. So once I've added in the RV11, I'm just going to blend that back out with the RV10. And then if I felt like it got too much in any places, I'll just grab the colorless blender one more time and just soften the edges of that. And that is going to finish up the coloring. So I'll bring in the second panel to show you how that turned out and trim all of these images out with their matching dies. For my background, I've taken a piece of Bristol smooth surface cardstock and I've trimmed that out with the largest of the outside in stitch rectangle stackables from Lawn Fawn. Then I'm going to take the Sunray background stencil and I'm going to blend on some Distress Oxide ink. I'm starting with some Kitsch Flamingo up toward the top. This is going to be the light reflecting around the room from that pink disco ball. So I wanted it to be darkest right up at the top. And then I'm going to use some spun sugar down toward the bottom of that to just help it fade into the background. And I don't need to take it down too far, just right in the top center of the card. Then I'm going to bring in the brick wall stencil and I want to create the look of being inside an igloo. So I'm going to blend on some Salvage Patina Distress Oxide ink and I'm going to put that in the corners and then a little bit underneath that pink reflected light. I'm not going to take that down toward the bottom because that will be our dance floor. So I'm going to bring in some shaded lilac as well because I wanted there to be a little bit of purple in there, kind of mixing the blue and the pink together. And then once I'm happy with that, I will remove that stencil and add a little bit more ink down toward the bottom because that is going to be our icy, snowy floor. And so it's going to reflect the same lights as everything above. So I'm just going to add a little bit of that in there. And I'll also bring some of that onto the bricks to just soften them up a bit and just give them that frosty tone. Once that's done, I'm going to pop it into my MISTI so that I can stamp my sentiment. I'm going to do that in VersaFine Onyx Black ink because it's nice and crisp black and lays well over Distress Oxide inks. And I'm going to stamp out "Have a Very Cool Christmas" since that goes with kind of the frosty cold theme. Then I'm going to create an insert for the inside of my card since I'm using a darker colored cardstock. So I'm going to take another penguin, one that is holding a sign. I'm going to stamp him in merman ink. And then inside the sign, I'm going to stamp, "I'm snow glad we're friends." I have scored and created a standard A2 top folding card using some hyacinth cardstock from Lawn Fawn. So I will take that insert and glue that to the inside first. And then I'm going to take my background and glue that to the front of the card base. So that card base measures 4 1/4 wide by 5 1/2 tall. Just smooth that down into place, and then I can bring in my images. I'm going to be using a mixture of foam tape and liquid glue. I'm going to start with this ice wall, this ice block wall that is going to be both the DJ table and also the snack bar. I'll hang the disco ball right above that, and I did not press that ice block wall down completely yet because I need to tuck my DJ back behind it. And then I can press that down into place, and I will add the little bucket of fish down at the opposite end where the snack bar is going to be. And then I'll have the radio right below the disco ball. Below the ice block wall, I'm going to add a bank of snow, and that is using one of the large clouds from the Unicorn Picnic stamp set. So I've got one that's going below the icy wall, and then the other one I'm actually going to cut into 2 parts and have a little bit of snow kind of blowing in from the sides, and then it will be clear where the dancers have been moving around and kind of pushing the snow out of the way as they shuffle their feet. So I'm just going to trim those down and glue one on the right hand side and then one a little bit lower on the left. Then I can start adding in my penguins. The one wearing the beanie hat, he's kind of taking a break from dancing and he's coming up to the snack bar to see what's on offer. And then I'm going to have another penguin over on the left-hand side to balance him out. Those two are in the same colors. Between them, I'm going to have my girl penguin. But to get her spaced right, I decided to bring in the other two so that I can figure out exactly where I want her. I did have to tear off a little bit of the foam tape so that she would lay flat against that snowbank that is underneath the ice block wall. And then the one that's facing forward, I kind of tipped him a little bit toward the right, and the other one I'm going to tip toward the left just to make it look like they're dancing. I'll add some extra little drifts of snow underneath the radio and the DJ, and then I'll have a smaller one underneath the frozen fish, which are thawing for the snack. I'll add the little bow to the girl penguin's side of the head. I don't know if that's exactly where her ear is, but anyway. And then I'm going to add some of these music notes coming out of the radio so that we really get those fun and festive vibes. I've got a couple little trios of notes, and then I've got one little single, like it's 2 notes, but it's 1 image. And then I'm going to tuck my snow cones next to the frozen fish. And then I have these little sparkle marks that are also from the Unicorn Picnic stamp set. And I'm going to add those onto my disco ball and all around the room just to show that glittering light that's kind of coming out from there. So I've got a couple of single larger ones and then a couple of little trios as well. And I'm just going to place those here and there around the scene to kind of fill in some of the empty spaces and just give the card a little bit more movement. I want it to look really festive and fun and like there's a big party going on for the holiday. And it's a little bit hard to tell on camera, but I did color those in with the RV00 marker, so the lightest pink that I used, just to give them a little bit of a glow. But of course, I will be adding some sparkle to this card in just a second. So once I've placed my last little bit of glitter, I'm going to bring in some Stardust Stickles, and I'm going to add that to all of the glitter marks. I'm also going to add it to my disco ball. At first I was just adding it to some of the squares here and there, but in the end I decided to add it to all the squares. I'm not going to overdo it. I'm using the nozzle to drag that stickles around so it's not like too heavy, but I definitely wanted that whole disco ball to be sparkly. So I'm going to add it to all of that, and then I'm also going to add it to any of the snowbanks or ice. So I'm just going here and there around the scene and adding little bits of that so that the whole card really sparkles when you tip it into the light. I also added some to my snow cones. And that is going to finish off this card. I'll lift it up to the light so you can see all of that detail and give you another peek at the inside. I hope you guys enjoyed this one. I thought it was a fun concept, and even though that disco ball isn't perfect, I think it's still a fun detail that really adds to this scene. So if you enjoyed it too, please be sure to hit that like button, leave me a comment down below. I'd love to hear from you. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and ring the notification bell if you want to be alerted when I post new videos. The products I use will all be listed and linked in the description bar below. And I'll also put up day 8 of my previous 2 years of holiday card series in case you'd like to keep watching. Thanks so much for spending your time with me today. I hope you had a good one, and I'll see you soon in the next. Bye-bye.